Today we're going to learn about the supply and demand model of economic theory. We're going to learn about the market and in specific reference to the demand curve, the law of diminishing return, and the axes of the graph of a supply and demand model. So this graph here represents our market, and on a downward slope we have what's called the demand curve. On an upward slope we have what's called a supply curve, and where they intersect is what we call the equilibrium. It's important to remember that on the y-axis we measure this in price in dollars, and on the x-axis we measure this with quantity of the product or the service supplied for the market. Now, what exactly is a market? A market is when a transaction occurs between at least one buyer and at least one seller. Over here we have a buyer, over here we have a seller, and the buyer is willing to put up cash or money to purchase whatever the supplier or the producer of the market is producing or selling. As soon as this transaction takes place, we have what's called a market. So what does this look like in a graph? Well, basically, the demand curve is made up of all the buyers or the consumers of the product within the market, and the supply curve is made up of the producers or the suppliers within the market. On the y-axis we have price, on the x-axis we have quantity, and basically the reason for the demand curve being downward sloped is because of what we call the law of diminishing return. The law of diminishing return refers to the fact that a buyer will decrease their reservation price, meaning they will not pay as much for a product or service if they consume more of that product or service. So the quantity goes up, the price comes down. Let's look at an example of this. Sam is stuck in the middle of the desert. It's hot, he's dying of dehydration, and I, as the supplier, offer him a glass of water. I'm supplying glasses of water in this instance. Sam is probably willing to pay everything he has for that one glass of water, just to save death. So he pays me $200 for his first glass of water. After he consumes his first glass of water, Sam is relatively happier. As you can see here, Sam's a lot happier, actually. And I offer him a second glass of water. Sam's still thirsty, but still probably not willing to pay me $200 for a glass of water. He's already consumed his first. So Sam's only willing to pay me $50 for his second glass of water. Now, Sam, after this second glass of water, actually is extremely happy. He's not thirsty anymore, although he's still hot, and he's certainly not at the point of dehydration, but I offer him a third glass of water regardless. For this third glass of water, Sam will only pay me $5 and consumes the third glass of water. The reason why Sam paid me only $5 for the third glass of water is because he wasn't quite as needy of it as his first glass, and certainly wasn't as thirsty as he consumed his second glass. So hence the reason why the price that Sam is willing to pay for the third glass drops. As we can see here, as quantity of glasses of water increase, the price that Sam is willing to pay decreases. Let's look at this on a graph. So we have Sam, which makes up the demand curve because he's the buyer. We have me, because I'm the supplier of a glass of water within the desert. And we have on the y-axis the price, and we have on the x-axis the quantity, which in this case is water. So let's look at the units on the demand curve. So Sam's first glass of water is about here on the demand curve because it matches up with a 1, which is 1 glass of water, on the quantity axis. Where this 1 sits, the price is high, and in our instance, it was $200. For our second glass of water, where it sits on the demand curve is about here. On the x-axis, it matches up to a 2 for 2 cups of water, and on the y-axis, it matches up, in our instance, with a $50 price. For his third glass of water, Sam was only willing to pay $5, so on the x-axis, we write a 3, where this point is, and we match it up, and it correlates with a 5 on the y-axis. We can see here that the more glasses of water that Sam consumes, the less he's willing to pay. Hence the downward slope of the demand curve, and hence why the law of diminishing return applies to the downward slope of the demand curve.